All right. So for today, we are continuing with this sort of what if theme that we've been doing. And I think today's episode is going to be another very interesting one because we are going to be covering what if for all of the Marvel movies that are not the Spider-Man or X-Men ones that we've already covered, but there's still a lot of other Marvel characters, so this should be another fruitful episode. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to my co-host.
All right, awesome. Yeah, lots of very exciting characters and movies to talk about today. Um, we're going to kick things off with some unmade movies from Marvel's first family, which is the Fantastic Four. So most people know about the infamous Roger Corman 1994 Fantastic Four film that was notoriously super cheap, low budget. It was made for like $1 million, which was still very low for the 90s, and was only made so that Fox could retain the rights to Fantastic Four, and it was never given a release. Never given a home release, never given a theatrical release. It was simply just the deal was if you make a movie, it didn't say you had to release it. If you make a movie, then you can retain the rights. And it notoriously got shelved afterwards. So that sets the context for the first film we're discussing, which is Peyton Reed's Fantastic Four. So, like I said, Roger Corman had that 1994 movie called The Fantastic Four release. Or sorry, not release, be produced in 1994. And shortly afterwards, since Fox was able to retain the rights, they started moving forward with an actual, official, big budget adaptation of the property in 1995, which sort of begs the question of why they just didn't do that to begin with. So the studio wanted what they described as a sitcom style tone for this Fantastic Four movie and a quote unquote family comedy genre. And it eventually evolved into just a revolving door for a variety of different American comedy directors that they sought to direct this project, including Chris Columbus, who directed Home Alone 1 and 2, Mrs. Doubtfire, Sam Wiseman, who directed George of the Jungle, which was a hit 90s comedy movie, Peter Siegel, who directed Tommy Boy, and Raja Gosnell, who directed Home Alone 3 and the first live action Scooby Doo movie. All of these people came on board before eventually stepping down. Eventually, in April of 2001, it found its way into the hands of director Peyton Reed, who most people might know as the future director of the MCU Ant-Man trilogy, who was fresh off his feature directorial debut with the sports comedy Bring It On. Reed would later reveal in 2019 that his vision for the film would take place in the 1960s, but an alternate 1960s that looked similar to the Jetsons universe that had a sleek 50s, 60s sci fi technology vibe in a bustling metropolis of New York City. While much isn't known about the specific plot of the movie beyond the tone and the setting, one of the things that was a lot of hot talk at the time was his ideal castings for the Fantastic Four. So, what he had in mind for Reed Richards' Mr. Fantastic, he wanted to cast Alexis Denisof. So, Alexis Denisof is mostly a TV actor. He was best known for his roles on Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. If you've ever seen How I Met Your Mother, he also has a recurring role in How I Met Your Mother as Sandy Rivers. He would be Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic. Charlize Theron was going to be Sue Storm, Invisible Woman. Paul Walker was going to be Johnny Storm, Human Torch. John C. Reilly as Ben Grimm, The Thing. And finally, Alan Rickman as the main villain, Doctor Doom. So that's essentially all we know about Peyton Reed's Fantastic Four, the first attempt at a serious big budget adaptation of the property. So, what are your thoughts?
So, real quick before touching on this, I'm not familiar with, I think you said it was Roger Corman's movie, and I just want to make sure I understood correctly. So, he made an entire movie, but it was, like you said, it was filmed on Fruit by the Foot, and then they just didn't release it, so it exists somewhere in the ether?
Correct. I believe you can find it like pirated online or even sections on YouTube, but the movie literally never got a home release, never got a theatrical release, and for a long time before the internet really took off, it was just lost.
Interesting. And that Yeah, that does beg the question why they didn't just make a real movie to keep the license. Anyway, um, yeah, this one that you're describing, uh, I with everything we know, all I think I can really say is I like the cast and I like the Fantastic Four, so I would assume I would have liked this movie. So I would err on the side of yes, I wish this would have happened. However, just to make sure that I got the that I have my timeline correct, this would have been like late '90s, pre the one we got in like 2004, whenever that one came out.
Correct. This was Peyton Reed's specific pitch was around April of 2001. So it would have been this
Okay.
was being considered in development like the late 90s, but this specific version kind of came onto the scene in the very early 2000s.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I guess this is similar to some of the discussions we had in the earlier episodes where knowing what we got with with like Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis and them, I I like those movies, so it is interesting, but at the end of like I think this one sounds really fun as well.
I agree. I like the cast, especially for the time. I like the setting. It seems like some of that is going into the MCU adaptation we're getting next year with Fantastic Four First Steps, where it's in an alternate 1960s that also seems to have this sort of like Jetsons 60s sci-fi. And I just feel like Fantastic Four really feels like the kind of thing that fits in that setting. And I think the whole sitcom style family comedy aspect also works for it because I think that's some of the best parts of the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies that are near and dear to my heart, just as someone who grew up with them and is very nostalgic for them. I think some of the best bits are the chemistry between the cast and that sort of sitcom family um, sort of a tone that they go for.
I agree. That's the this because slightly off topic, but are you what are your thoughts on First Steps?
It is probably one of the only MCU projects I genuinely am curious. I'm not entirely sold on the cast, especially Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards. I think Vanessa Kirby's fine as Sue Storm. I think Joseph Quinn is fine as Human Torch. I've never seen anything with Eben Moss-Backrack in it, so I'm not familiar with his acting at all. Because I haven't seen The Bear, which I know is primarily one of his biggest starring roles. Um, so I'm hopefully optimistic because I love Fantastic Four as a set of characters, and I just am looking forward to more Fantastic Four and better Fantastic Four because as much as I love the Tim Story ones, I can acknowledge that they were far from perfect. So
But I don't want to say this. Yeah, he was on. The only thing I know him from is he's in season one of The Punisher.
okay, well then I have seen him in something, but that's how forgettable he is, I guess.
I'm pretty sure he's the tech guy who helps him out in that first season. But yeah, okay. Um,
Okay.
the my parents and all of my coworkers love The Bear and keep telling me to watch it. But I would agree. I would say it's not necessarily the thing I'm most hyped for. However, to your point, I really like the cast. Pedro and Vanessa are two of my favorite actors, and I Quinn's fine. I've only seen him in Stranger Things.
So, continuing with the Fantastic Four theme, we are going to discuss Tim Story's Fantastic Four 3 and 4. So, Tim Story, as you know, was the director of the 2005 Fantastic Four film and the 2007 sequel, Rise of the Silver Surfer. And he definitely had, or he definitively had plans for a third and fourth installment that never saw the light of day. So, due to 20th Century Fox's disappointment in the box office and critical performance of Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer, the potential third and fourth Fantastic Four films, and a Silver Surfer spinoff film that we'll discuss in a minute were canceled. The main cast, though, Yoan Gruffid, Michael Chiklis, Jessica Alba, and Chris Evans, had actually originally signed on for a three-picture deal anyway. The third film, there was actually quite a bit of groundwork done. It was set to be entitled Fantastic Four: Prey of the Black Panther. and was set to introduce the nation of Wakanda, as well as its titular king and protector, T'Challa slash the Black Panther, with the main villain being Ulysses Claw. Because if you may or may not know that Black Panther was actually originally introduced in a Fantastic Four comic, and all the Wakanda, Black Panther, Claw, all of that originated in Fantastic Four comics and Fantastic Four lore. Tim Story said that he would have liked to have cast Jimon Hansu as the Black Panther. However, Idris Elba and, surprisingly enough, Wesley Snipes were also being considered for the role of T'Challa. Jessica Alba also said that they were interested in having Sue Storm be pregnant in the third film in order to later introduce the character of Franklin Richards down the line, which is their child, who in the comics, he's Reed and Sue's son, who's born with powers. He's basically a mutant and born with powers, and he's a very, very powerful telekinetic and telepath. Screenwriter Don Payne, who wrote Rise of the Silver Surfer, mentioned that he was interested in returning for a prospective fourth film where he would want to introduce. Basically, this sounds incredibly ambitious in just one film, but in a future installment beyond the Black Panther storyline, he would have liked to have introduced the Negative Zone, the Skrulls, and the Inhumans, and make Annihilus, who, if you're not familiar in Marvel Comics, is a very prominent Fantastic Four villain. He's basically a giant bug alien man from the Negative Zone as the main villain, and casting a child actor to play Franklin Richards, who they wanted to introduce down the line. So kind of grouped those two together, but in general, how would you have felt about continuing the Tim Story Fantastic Four films with these storylines?
Before I speak to that, I do have to ask a question. And before I ask the question, for all the people listening, if you don't know, we don't talk about any of this stuff ahead of time, so that way we're both very much surprised while we're talking. And so I apologize, this is a spoiler. When you said, interestingly enough, Wesley Snipes, were you doing that because you are going to be covering the Wesley Snipes Black Panther project?
So that was not something that we're going to be talking about today because there wasn't anything substantial. Like, I don't think that was ever actually being considered, like a
Okay.
whole solo spin-off movie with just him. I just meant just because he was just fresh off of being Blade.
Okay. Yeah, to my understanding from watching like behind the scenes stuff, Wesley Snipes had been talking to producers to try and get a Black Panther movie made, and it they said we don't want to do that, but you can be Blade, and they had to like convince him to be Blade. Of course, the irony, because now he's probably most known for playing Blade, but apparently he only went to the studio ahead of time to be like, I want to be Black Panther, I want to be Black Panther, and then they said, nah, you're gonna be Blade. That's pretty much. I don't know if, to your point, I don't think there was ever a script or anything, but Wesley always talks, so he's like, well, I wanted to be Black Panther, but I'll take a vampire.
It's funny. I did not. That never came up in my research that he individually was going to have his own Black Panther franchise. But that is interesting now that he's. I guess that would have had to have happened before these movies. So I wonder if that was definitely one of the reasons he was being considered.
Yeah, that
But
definitely, there's a lot of layers there.
primarily, though, Tim Story wanted Jimon Hansu. So what do you think about Jimon Hansu as
Oh yeah, that's the
Black Panther?
before Chadwick Boseman was cast, and I guess technically Gmon was in Guardians of the Galaxy, so this doesn't work exactly. But Black Panther is one of the few comics I've actually read for Marvel. As you know, I'm more of a DC guy, but whenever I would like, I wanted Jimon Hunsu. He would have been my pick if I was doing it. I think he's a good actor. I feel like he would have been able to play the part really well. So I like that casting. I also, as you know, I'm a bigger defender of these like 2000s superhero movies that famously bomb at the box office, and so from what I remember at least, I haven't watched them in a while. I like the Tim Story, Fantastic Four duology, and so I wanted sequels. I would have liked these sequels. I knew about the Black Panther stuff, so I thought that would have been cool. I guess this what I'm about to say may not make the most sense, but I'm curious, given when it would have come out with the relative limitations of what was being done in movies, do you think that the Wakanda we would have seen in like late 2000s would have been as good as the one that we saw in late 2010s?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't think the difference is that, jarring between now and then, but
Okay.
to that point, both of these movies historically did not have super high budgets even for the times. So maybe if Rise of the Silver Surfer had killed it at the box office, they would have upped the budgets for sequels. So it's possible. I think in principle, yes. Just whether or not it would have had the actual budget to do so, I don't know.
That's what I'm thinking of, like the famously terrible CGI in Daredevil, and imagining that uh for the stuff in Fantastic Four 3. I actually don't know this, and you might. With Rise of the Silver Surfer, was there any sort of like behind the scenes studio meddling that led to the product that was put out, or was that full Tim story and it just didn't work?
To the best of my knowledge, there's no Zack Snyder Justice League situation. It really was just this was just the product that they came out with, and it just wasn't well received.
Okay, I ask because with Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi has talked about for a decade now at this point about how much the studio was involved and how much they made him have to change the script and the rewrites and all that jazz. So I wasn't sure if that happened with story.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
So,
But
in
yeah,
conclusion, yes, I would have liked to have seen these.
yeah, definitely. I would this one's an easy yes. I liked the Tim Story duology. I liked the idea of the cast they would have gone for. Idris Elba would have been an interesting one. Random tangent. I'm finally watching The Wire for the first time, and Idris Elba's
Oh,
very
there
good
you
on
go.
that show.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to something related, the aforementioned Silver Surfer spinoff. So a spinoff to The Rise of the Silver Surfer, focusing on Norrin Rad Silver Surfer, was announced after the film's released with J. Michael Straczynski, who was known for being a writer on the sci-fi show Babylon 5. He also wrote the scripts for Changeling in Ninja Assassin and would go on to write the script for the first Thor movie, seeking a 2009 release. According to Straczynski, the spin-off would have been more of a prequel, exploring the origins of Norrin Rad on his home planet of Zed Law and how he first became the Silver Surfer, and would incorporate much more of Galactus that Rise of the Silver Surfer did. However, the project was ultimately canceled after Rise of the Silver Surfer's failure at the box office. However, both Lawrence Fishburne and Doug Jones were expected to reprise their respective roles as Norrad and the Silver Surfer in this film. So, no big specific plot details for that, but this spinoff was in development. That'd be like a prequel about how he became the Silver Surfer, all that in this universe with this version of the character. So, what do you think about that?
I also would have wanted it. It would have been interesting because if I remember correctly, the Galactus in Fantastic Four 2 is a giant space cloud monster, like kind of the meme you see about how for some reason there's a lot of 2000 superhero villains were like cloud monsters, and so it'd be interesting to see him interact with a non-human. I know Galactus isn't a human, but like a non-physical being, we'll say. Uh, but yeah, I remember liking the Silver Surfer when I was younger. So that's kind of I guess that's really all I could say. And really random, but I know they're two completely different movies. Ninja Assassin is awesome. Just recommending that to the listeners.
There you go. Yeah, no, I would have been very down to see this. I mean, like I said, I love these movies. I loved the Silver Surfer as a character when this movie came out, just because I thought he looked really cool, and I loved the whole when he would merge through matter and whatnot. I just phase through matter and all that. I just thought he just looked really cool and seemed really cool. So I would have liked to have seen more of that version because I think he looked great, like exactly like how he should have looked.
For sure. Definitely the um I yeah. The look alone attracted me as a wee lad. So I 100% agree with that. I don't think he was I don't remember him being anywhere close to being the worst part of that film is probably the best way to put it.
I completely agree. So, speaking of other Fantastic Four sequels, Fant Four Stick 2. So, Fox once had its eye on making a sequel to Josh Trank's Fan4stick film, even went so far as to schedule it for a summer 2017 release ahead of its theatrical opening. The sequel never happened after Trank's movie incredibly bombed at the box office, but that did not stop producer and writer Simon Kinberg and certain cast members from saying they were open to making a sequel for years. Kinberg relayed for a sequel, they were interested in exploring new worlds with Reed's Quantum Gate that was introduced in the first film, and that they would focus on introducing the negative zone with, just like Fantastic Four 4, Annihilus, the giant alien space bug from the negative zone, as the main villain. So this never actually officially moved forward with like an official script or anything. Those were just the ideas they wanted to explore. How would you feel about if they gave maybe a second shot to a to those characters in that casting and made a second one?
So I don't know if I've ever told you this. In my personal opinion, uh, this is probably the worst movie I have ever seen. I feel like I'm pretty lenient when I watch stuff. I feel like I very rarely hate stuff, even if it is like objectively bad. But I hated this movie so much. I left with such a bad taste in my mouth. I've never wanted to walk out of a theater before, and this made me want to walk out. Like I just, I've not rewatched it since, but I remember going to see it on opening weekend and the emotions I had, and that's what I'm going off of. I have never felt those emotions when watching a movie. So that's why I say it's like the worst movie I've ever seen, probably my least favorite movie. So because of that, I don't really want to give the second one a chance. There's no way I would have watched it if this did happen. I know that there's like a mysterious Trank cut that apparently makes the first one better. I don't know if that would be. I don't know if that's true. We're probably never going to see it, but for me personally, I just remember the absolute disgust I felt emotion wise coming out of this movie. So there's no way I would have wanted a sequel.
Yeah, this movie, it's so frustrating to me. Like, there's so much promise it has in it. Like, I really liked the cast. I liked the look. I liked the vibe. I liked the tone. And it just got hacked to absolute crap. There is a Trank cut out there somewhere. Like, there's so much, like, there's like behind the scenes photos of them filming scenes. And you can tell there's so many reshoots and it's just a total hack job. Like, I guarantee you Josh Trank's original vision would have been actually a really decent film, but it's just hard to say with this film and the final product being what it is. If a sequel could have even been any better, because if they did it to him once, who's to say they'll do it to him again? They wouldn't do it to him again. So, in principle, though, like I said, I liked the cast, the tone, the look, the feel. So maybe a sequel could have been improved, but I completely agree. The movie's just an absolute mess.
Yeah. I
So, oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, I just the I get where you're going with the in principle. So take that as you will, but I probably would still have to say no.
That's fair. Okay. So this one's actually pretty interesting. This might be one of the ones I'd be most curious to see out of all of these. This is Noah Hawley's Doctor Doom solo movie. So Noah Hawley, who is known as the showrunner for the shows, the reboot show of Fargo and the show Legion, was announced to be writing and directing a Doctor Doom solo film for Fox at 2017 San Diego Comic-Con. In subsequent interviews, Hawley described his vision as an anti-hero story and a mixture of genres, very much in line with Captain America the Winter Soldier as a 70s style political thriller. His vision entailed Doom as the monarch of an impoverished post-Soviet Baltic state that's seeking to reestablish its former glory at all costs. The project was not immediately canceled in the wake of Disney buying Fox, and as recently as June 2019, Hawley confirmed he had met with Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige to discuss placing the film within the MCU. Obviously, knowing what we know now about Robert Downey Jr. playing Doctor Doom, this seems very unlikely, but this idea for a Doctor Doom solo film. I think this sounds great and it could actually work. I think Doom is a character that you could easily make an anti-hero. I know Sony's been doing this trend of like taking Spider-Man villains and making them anti-heroes and it doesn't quite work. I think Doom genuinely is a character where this could work because he has such a twisted sense of morality where it's like he will do so much wrong but for actually good reasons. And so I think this whole pitch of him being in charge of this country and it's like post Soviet era, so it got like ruined by communism in the Soviet Union, and he's trying to reestablish it to its former glory. So he's kind of an anti hero. I just think that this sounds great, and I would really much have liked to have seen this.
It's it's interesting. So two things. One, with the way that you describe it, it sounds almost similar to like post World War One when Germany was completely destroyed and Hitler ended up winning on the promise of rebuilding Germany to its once great glory and like a lot of that patriot nationalism. And I could imagine it following somewhat of a similar parallel. And then secondly, not not that they would go this way. However, let's say everybody loves RDJ's Doctor Doom and Doomsday and Secret Wars. Well, maybe in phase 10, I guess 10, 11, whatever's next, they are like, okay, well, let's do this 70s prequel so you can see more of Doom. Like they did Black Widow. They, I think, are doing other prequels. You know, I don't think they'd be opposed to giving the audience more RDJ as Doom, assuming he is taken in well. So maybe they're just sitting on Holly's script because they do like it and they want to eventually use it. Or I doubt it, but maybe I actually think that could work. Is the point I'm getting at?
Yeah. I think it could work because I haven't seen Fargo or Legion, but I just think this pitch, I was just sold. I think I would really like to see this play out at some point, whether it's unrelated to the MCU or is linked to Robert Downey Jr.'s version. I just think that that story sounds really captivating and really interesting.
I don't know if we ever talked about this, but before RDJ was announced, did you have a person that you really wanted to see announced as Doom? Did you have like a fan casting?
No, anyone but Robert Downey Jr. maybe was my fan casting. I just there was a lot. I mean, people were like Cillian Murphy. People were, um, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Jamie Lannister from Game of Thrones, like Nikolaj Kloster Waldo
Oh,
or
yeah.
whatever. People were saying it's so funny because people were like Mads Mikkelsen, and they're like he already played a character in the MCU that no one remembers, and then here we have Robert Downey Jr. So any one of those.
Yeah, that's the of the ones I saw online, Nikolaj is the one I would have picked. He's a really good actor and I feel like he could have done Doom well. But I was just curious if like imagining this movie if you like had somebody in mind.
I think Mads Mikkelsen would be a good choice. He's villainous and Eastern European enough. Okay, so now we will talk about Ben Affleck's Daredevil 2. So in October of 2004, Ben Affleck stated in an interview he would only return to the lead role of Daredevil if Fox would renegotiate to tell the darker stories of Daredevil. And he showed interest in two particular storylines that he'd like to see adapted in a sequel. The Guardian Devil graphic novel, which features Daredevil caring for an infant that may be the Antichrist, that focuses on heavy Catholic themes and religious content, or the Born Again storyline, where Matt Murdock's identity is revealed to the world. Kingpin makes his world come crashing down and is on the hunt to kill him, so Matt Murdock has to fake his death and live under a different identity. However, by November of 2006, Affleck stated he would never reprise the role and actually claimed he would never return to play a superhero. But obviously, we know he was cast as Batman some years later. In July, in July of that same year, Michael Clark Duncan showed interest in returning for the role of Kingpin, but stated he was not willing to gain the extra weight and muscle mass he did for the first one, and actually suggested that this could be worked into the script for the character to have been training in jail to slim down and become faster in order to engage in combat against Daredevil, since that was his fatal flaw in the first film. However, there have been rumors that a script for a sequel film was written, and that adapted the Born Again storyline with Mr. Fear, who basically is Marvel's Scarecrow, as the primary antagonist, and would introduce Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, who in the comics had a love story with Matt Murdock. So I think the Daredevil movie is underrated, especially the director's cut. I would have liked to have seen more sequels.
Yeah, so this is similar. It's kind of like I said earlier. I think a lot of the 2000 superhero movies don't get the respect that they deserve. I like this one. I think a lot of the reasons why people don't like it were just a product of the time, and it feels unfair to knock that movie for it when all the other movies were doing the same thing. So take that as you will. But it's interesting that you said Affleck would never return to superhero movies, because you probably also know Colin Farrell said the same thing, and then now he's back as Penguin. Um, so it's also I don't think I've ever told you this, but growing up, Michael Clark Duncan was my favorite actor. R.I.P. So I'm gonna say yes to seeing a sequel purely just because I wanted more Duncan. But yeah, this is what did. So I know they did that spin-off Elektra movie. Was that going to get sequels as well? Like, would she have returned?
Not that I was able to find. Nothing from
Okay.
that. That movie did pretty well, or pretty badly, like right off the bat.
I'm curious if they were going to try and make a mini universe off of it. If actually, if I remember correctly, um in the X-Men, what if we did? Didn't you say that there was a plan to do Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Elektra, X-Men like all together?
That sort of like Fox Civil War movie, but that was around like 2010, 2011. So I don't know if that would have necessarily been Ben Affleck's Daredevil or just a recast Daredevil, like it just has the character, because it was
Okay.
sometime after.
Okay, yeah. All right. That's yeah. But no, I definitely I would say yes just because I did like this movie. I do think it's underrated. I just to clarify, and you may not know this, I know Ben Affleck has done his own movies before. Like, would he have wanted to help write and direct the sequel?
Probably not. At this point, he hadn't directed anything. He didn't direct until Gone Baby Gone in 2007. And
Okay.
even then, it was like one movie every several years. Now it seems he's more focused on directing and directing more things. So he might have had like a hand in the story, but I doubt he would have directed it at this point in his career.
Would you have preferred um Born Again or the God Devil? The one with the Antichrist. Sorry, I forgot the title for it.
Guardian Angel.
Guardian Angel. I wasn't even close.
Uh, Born Again. And I mean, that the Born Again storyline got kind of soft adapted in Daredevil season 3
Yeah.
with Matt, the world thinking he's dead, and Kingpin on the loose again. And even though the Disney Plus series upcoming is called Daredevil Born Again, I think that's just more or less just trying to talk about how the show is back and Charlie Cox is back. I don't expect it to actually adapt the Born Again storyline.
Do you think? And I haven't watched where I think he was in She-Hulk, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't think that the Daredevil in the MCU is going to have as dark of tones as on the Netflix show. Would do you agree with that theory?
I cannot say one way or the other. It feels like they contradict, like they go back and forth, and obviously, notoriously with Daredevil Born Again, they had the whole season planned. They filmed half of it, and then they scrapped it, went right back to the drawing board, and this is their second attempt after they literally filmed half a season of material, and so it's still unclear what was included in that for original season pitch and what's different in this one. I think part of it was a little too MCUified, and they were like, no, we need to, because at first it was like Karen's not back and Foggy's not back. It's literally just Charlie Cox recast as a different Daredevil in the MCU, just bringing the same actor. And then I think fans didn't like that. And so now it's like we have Deborah Ann Woll as Karen Page back. We have Eldon Henson as Foggy back. And I think they're making it. It originally wasn't supposed to be like the Netflix show, and I think they've corrected it to be more in line with the Netflix show. But I don't think it'll still be either way. I don't think it'll be as dark and gritty as the Netflix show.
Do so I heard, I thought it was confirmed, but I guess they're just rumors. I heard that the entire like Defenders Netflix groups were coming back. Like I heard Punisher and Iron Fist specifically, and is that all just unconfirmed?
So John Bernthal is officially confirmed to return as Punisher in Daredevil Born Again, but not everything beyond that is entirely speculative. There's like rumors that Kristen Ritter is returning as Jessica Jones in Born Again because she like posted on Instagram that she was in Atlanta during filming or whatnot. So you know how Reddit like puts things together.
Okay.
And but as far as Finn Jones and Mike Coulter as Luke Cage and Iron Fist, I haven't seen anything actually like substantive.
Okay. I feel like I feel like if they wanted to, that you remember how they did like a Heroes for Hire solo episode in, I shouldn't say solo, that like episode 7 of season 2 or something was the Heroes for Hire. I feel like they could do a full show of that. If I'm not mistaken, that's a really popular comic run, so I feel like that would be something that they could do.
Yeah, 100%. Like in like solo Luke Cage comics and solo Iron Fist comics, both did kind of poor. Like they were always like C-list characters, and then they had the Heroes for Hire, and it was very popular in like the 70s and 80s.
Okay. So yeah, sorry for the random trail off on Daredevil, but that I was just curious. And yeah, so more to wrap everything up, moral of the story is I would have said yes to Daredevil too. I I guess to answer my own question, I actually think I would have wanted to see the Guardian Angel storyline. I've never read the graphic novel, but the way you described it sounds very interesting.
Had both, we could have had a trilogy.
There you go.
So, continuing with the Daredevil theme, this is an interesting one. This is Joe Carnahan's Daredevil trilogy. So in 2012, 20th Century Fox owned the rights to the character of Daredevil before the rights would revert back to Marvel Studios. In order to try and halt the reversion of rights back to Marvel Studios, Fox scrambled to get a new Daredevil movie off the ground before losing grip on the character completely. With literally just a few weeks left until the rights would revert, the studio recruited writer-director Joe Carnahan, best known for Smokin' Aces, The A-Team, The Gray. He's basically the American Guy Ritchie to craft a Daredevil pitch. Carnahan envisioned a take on The Man Without Fear as a gritty 70s style crime thriller in the vein of Taxi Driver, Dirty Harry, and Death Wish that would heavily pull from the classic Frank Miller run of the character during the 1980s. In fact, Carnahan went on to pitch an entire Daredevil trilogy that spanned over a decade and actually was placed in the 70s and 80s that would tonally emphasize three distinct musical genres relevant to the time periods they were set in that would feature heavily in the score and soundtrack. These three films were titled Daredevil 73, which would take from classic rock genre, Daredevil 79, which would take from the punk rock genre, and Daredevil 85, that would take from new wave and synth music. Carnahan wanted to pull primarily from the Born Again, which is a very popular storyline, and the Death of Elektra comic storylines, and wanted to bring in characters like Elektra and Bullseye and Kingpin while setting it in a very grounded universe, even more grounded than the 2003 Ben Affleck version. Sadly, Carnahan's take on Daredevil, which never would have worked at the time for the family friendly Fox because he wanted it to be very hard R, never came to pass. Despite negotiations to extend the deadline of the rights, Fox and Marvel ultimately couldn't come to terms on a deal, so the rights went back to Marvel. So, thoughts on Joe Carnahan's Fantastic Four? Or, bleh, Joe Carnahan's Daredevil.
I like
I don't
Joe
know why I said
Carnahan's
Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four. No, the I like it. I like the way you pitch that. It sounds interesting. I feel like I could get behind that. You have for a second when you mentioned musicals, I'm sorry, when you said the word musical, my brain went to like Deadpool dancing and singing, and then like 5 seconds later I realized what you meant. But For a split second there, I was like, "Dang, this sounds so cool!" And then they're going to be musicals, so that one's on me. But no, I like this pitch. I think it sounds very interesting. Um, yeah, that I did not know that that was how Marvel got the rights to Daredevil back. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I definitely am intrigued by this. I think Joe Carnahan would be a good character for or a good director for that. I think Daredevil is a good character for that sort of tone, that like really gritty 70s Dirty Harry, you know, Death Wish style crime thriller. I think that would have been great. And I'm not a huge music person, but I think that you could definitely figure out like making the movies tonally like the music genres that dominated that time period. I think it's a very creative idea. But
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
at the expense of not making the Netflix show, though, I would not want to make this.
That is it. That actually is a very interesting. So I have not gone back and rewatched them, so I don't know for sure. I think totality of everything together, knowing where it started, knowing where it ended, I would say Daredevil is the best. It is my favorite. However, as you know, I do not like Foggy and Karen's characters, and of course they are major parts of it. And I like Kingpin, I like Daredevil, I like pretty much every other character they put in there. But since two of the main characters are like my two least favorite characters in the entire Netflix verse, it always makes it so interesting when I talk about the Daredevil Netflix show because I think it's awesome. I just don't like those characters and they're big parts of it, so it's like I don't know, it's just conflicting. But yeah, that's I think I would still agree. I think especially because Daredevil is what launched the entire Netflix universe. So I feel like I feel like I'd have to agree that I would say no if it means not getting the Daredevil Netflix show, but also it does sound like a cool idea.
I completely agree. I think in principle, in a vacuum, I would like it, but ultimately not with the opportunity cost.
Um I also I know, of course, Frank Miller probably most famous for Dark Knight. The isn't would you isn't his Daredevil run like the second most popular thing? Like I know he did Sin City and 300, but isn't that Daredevil run extremely well received from like the audiences?
Yes, and it's where like the black suit comes from, like the iconic basic black suit with like the two wooden sticks that look like what he had in season one. That's all Frank Miller.
Okay.
So who knows? Could have been influenced by that. He could have just not worn a red suit for most of it. I don't know.
I think what he should have done is he should have worn an all black suit with a cowl and then a cape. And I don't know what animal would make sense going across the chest. Maybe just I'll throw out a bat. That sounds like it would have worked, right?
I mean, he does see with echolocation, so it makes sense. Anyway, okay. Moving on to another Fox property, that we've discussed before, but a different iteration. We're going to be going back to the character of Silver Surfer. We're going to be talking about a Silver Surfer movie from the 90s. So in 1989, a little bit of backstory on bringing Silver Surfer to the big screen. In 1989, Eric Fleming, who was a film student at USC School of Cinematic Arts, and Robert Letterman approached Marvel Studios and Constantin Films producer Bernd Eichinger to ask permission to make a short film featuring the Silver Surfer as proof of concept for the use of CGI in creating a realistic silver-colored human figure. Supervised by director Stephen Robiner, a 5-minute short film was completed in 1991 that premiered at the First Look USC Film Festival, one of the largest film school film festivals in the country, on September 21st, 1993, leading to significant interest from major studios in a feature-length Silver Surfer project. The style of the Silver Surfer was very reminiscent of the liquid metal T-1000 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day from 1991. In 1992, Quentin Tarantino fresh off his critical success with Reservoir Dogs, had actually come to Constantine Productions with his own Silver Surfer script, but was ultimately turned away. And unfortunately, we don't have that script. But the script we will be talking about is one written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who was known for writing Seven, 8mm, and Sleepy Hollow, who wrote a script for 20th Century Fox in 2000, but nothing ever came of this either. Walker's version was largely an Earth-set story, following Norrin Radd as the herald for Galactus, going from planet to planet, getting worlds ready for his master to devour, until he comes to Earth and loses his surfboard, which is then taken by the government and military to a top-secret research facility, basically Area 51, causing Radd, without his powers, to team up with a young local prostitute, taxi driver style, in order to get his surfboard back. In the process, Radd would learn from the girl about humanity and ultimately decide to save Earth and defeat Galactus himself, leading to a final showdown in space where Radd would take down Galactus and free himself from his mastery. So, based on that pitch alone, what do you think about an Earth set taxi driver style Silver Surfer film?
It does not immediately register with me. I guess I would say that I don't know. I would say not yes, not no. I don't know. I think my default's going to be I always want more superhero stuff, especially since I would have been young at the time and probably would have enjoyed watching it. But I don't. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't hate the idea. I guess am very much in the middle on it.
I completely agree. This seems like it could be interesting, especially that idea of it seems like on the surface you're like, oh, it's a Earth set story. That sounds really lame. But when you actually kind of dig into the pitch, it's like, okay, maybe there's something there. That sounds like it could be interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So, moving on, we will be discussing a couple of unmade Iron Man films. So, the first one we're going to discuss is a script from 1997 called The Iron Man. In April 1990, Universal Studios bought the rights to develop Iron Man for the big screen, with Stuart Gordon, known for his work on Reanimator, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and The Pit and the Pendulum, to direct a film based on the property. However, by February of 1996, 20th Century Fox had acquired the rights to Iron Man from Universal. In January of 1997, Nicolas Cage was being eyed to play the titular character, but later on in September of 1998, it was Tom Cruise who was considered to star, as well as produce. Jeff Vintar and Iron Man co-creator Stan Lee worked on a story treatment together, with Vintar adapting it into a full screenplay. The screenplay included a new science fiction origin for the character and featured MODOK as the main villain. In this version, Tony Stark would be a young weapons manufacturer and the CEO of Stark Industries in his late 20s, early 30s, trying to rebuild his public image and clean the blood off his hands after public outcry from the effects of some of his weapons in the Gulf War. In an effort to rebuild his image, Stark would design, build, and plan to unveil a new line of robotic suits called Rescuer Armor that would be able to fly to people in danger. Think someone's in a house fire, someone gets lost while hiking, someone's drowning. This armor will fly to them and put the people inside of itself and fly them to safety, and it also includes the full capability to heal them. While hosting a massive gala at his mansion home, his party would be infiltrated by a group of assassins that sabotage the party, leave Tony for dead with a bullet in his chest. But he would make his way to the secret basement workshop inside of his house, get inside one of his prototype rescuer armors, and have to leave the chest plate on at all times in order to keep the bullet from his chest. So in this version, it wouldn't just be simply an arc reactor. He would have the entire chest plate on at all times. The film would feature utilizing his technology and the rescuer armor to figure out who ordered the hit and why they chose to sabotage the rescuer armor, and he would uncover a massive corporate conspiracy that would involve the cyborg human computer hybrid MODOK, who, in this version, mentally controls an entire company's worth of androids disguised as humans in a company called AIM. So, The Iron Man with Nicolas Cage or Tom Cruise. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm on board. Um, the I will say I can see Tom Cruise more than Nicolas Cage, but I probably would have been open to either of them. I feel like they both would have been a very different Iron Man from Robert Downey Jr. I feel like we're just going to end up comparing that to him, of course, but I don't know if that necessarily would have been a bad thing. I don't know. It sounds interesting. I guess what were the two actors doing at the time that this was pitched where like we could do some sort of opportunity cost for what we may have missed, if that makes sense.
Nicolas Cage would have been hot off the rock. I believe he would have just made Face Off Con Air soon. Not
Okay.
not at yet. So it probably would have been Face Off Con Air. Tom Cruise was in his like drama era of like starring in like character dramas.
Okay. So yeah, if I have to give up Con Air, I'm going to say no, but if it's Tom Cruise, then I'm going to say yes.
I don't think Nicolas Cage really fits this part either way. I think Tom Cruise would have been great. And I think, yeah, I think I would have liked to have seen this in the 90s with Tom Cruise for sure.
Okay. Yeah. No, I agree. I think it'd be worth it if this sounds like a good pitch.
Agreed. So now we move on to a second Iron Man film that predates the MCU film called just Iron Man, just like the one we would end up getting. In 1999, after basically they decided not to move forward with that Jeff Vintar script, of all people, I guess he's just a huge comic book nerd. Quentin Tarantino was linked to a live action Iron Man film as a director and writer, but the studio decided not to go forward with his pitch. By July of 2000, the film was being written for New Line Cinemas, who had purchased the rights from 20th Century Fox, by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who worked on Little Monsters, Aladdin, The Mask of Zorro, and Small Soldiers. And what's very interesting to note about their first version was they introduced the concept of ending with the Nick Fury cameo. In June of 2001, New Line entered talks with Joss Whedon, who had primarily done television work with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Firefly, to direct the film. And in December of 2002, the screenwriters had completed their script. In December of 2004, however, the studio attached director Nick Cassavetes, known for directing at the time he was fresh off The Notebook, to produce the project for a summer 2006 release. Screenplay drafts were written by Alfred Goff and Miles Millar, who wrote Lethal Weapon 4, Shanghai Noon, and Spider-Man 2, as well as David Hayter, who directed the first X-Men or who wrote the first X-Men movie, X2, The Scorpion King, the first one, and Watchmen. This version would feature a young Tony Stark in his low to mid 20s. His father is still alive. Howard Stark is still alive, and in this version, evil, who would actually become the supervillain War Machine that he would have to fight in the end. After 2 years of unsuccessful development and deals with Cassavetes that fell through, New Line Cinema returned the film rights to Marvel Studios, who began working on a new version from scratch in November of 2005, the version that we would know today. So this one, not as much story details, just involvement details. The basic pitch, really young Tony Stark, his dad's still alive. His dad turns out to be a bad guy, becomes War Machine, they fight. What do you think?
I would say a soft yes. Once again, this one doesn't necessarily excite me, but I would say it excites me more than. Well, no, yeah, I would say a soft yes, just because I don't see anything that would make me not want to watch it. But yeah. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Because I'm basically in the same boat. It sounds like a cool pitch. They didn't have any casting for it, so I'm not sure which young 20 something they would have cast, but it's intriguing, but definitely not at the opportunity cost of Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man, and the MCU.
Okay. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. Excuse me.
This one, there's really nothing much to go on. I just wanted to put this out there for and I encourage you to Google this as I go along so you can see what I'm talking about. A live action She Hulk motion picture was actually planned in the early 1990s with Larry Cohen, who directed a lot of horror movies like It's Alive, Q, and Maniac Cop, as the writer and director. 10 months later, actress Bridget Nielsen was announced to play the title role, and she actually posed for photos dressed as She Hulk and her alter ego Jennifer Walters, but the movie was never produced, but they did that photo shoot nonetheless. So look up Bridget Nielsen She Hulk just for the fun of it. Did you get any hits?
No.
I'm looking at it right now. Brigitte
Okay.
Nielsen,
Yeah, that I spelled it wrong.
and then She Hulk. And there was
Okay.
actual like photo shoots she did that were like published in magazines that she never got to make.
Yeah, wow.
She literally just looks like a woman who's wearing green, not even like actually green skinned.
Yeah, the All right, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's no real details. I just thought that was worth noting because they took like promotional photos and put it in magazines, and everyone was excited. All five people were excited.
Okay. Yeah. That I I don't know. That seems weird. The
Favorite pitch of the day?
I just like that there was I just like that there was photos. That's hilarious.
Yes. So moving on, we have early attempts at an Iron Fist movie. So in May of 2000, Marvel Studios brought Artisan Entertainment Marvel Studios brought Artisan Entertainment to co-finance an Iron Fist film. The studio wanted Ray Park to star. So Ray Park is known as a martial artist and a stuntman who does a lot of his own stunts. He played like Darth Maul. He played Snake Eyes in the G.I. Joe movies. But he's known for being a great martial artist. They wanted to hire Ray Park to star as Danny Rand Iron Fist and have John Turman, who worked on Hulk and the 2003 Ang Lee Hulk and Daredevil, to write the script in January 2001, and Park began to extensively read the comics that Iron Fist appeared in. In July of 2001, Hong Kong martial arts director Kirk Wong was signed on to direct, with filming set for early 2002. However, production got pushed back and Wong ended up leaving the project. In April of 2003, Steve Carr, whose filmography baffles me for someone chosen for this, he directed Next Friday, the sequel to Friday, Dr. Dolittle 2, and Daddy Daycare, entered negotiations to direct. And in November of 2003, a new release date was given in 2006. However, Marvel Studios sat on the idea to make an Iron Fist movie, and in August of 2010, Marvel Studios actually hired Rich Wilkes, who wrote the scripts for the three Triple X films, to write a screenplay for an Iron Fist film that would be set in the MCU, but the film was eventually reworked into a Marvel Netflix series. So there's no like specific story details, but maybe some of that talent involved. How would you have felt about Ray Park as Iron Fist in the early 2000s?
Uh I know he ended up not becoming the greatest of persons, so it probably would have been interesting had this done well and then the stuff came out, and maybe that would have derailed the any potential franchise opportunities. But that all of that aside, I do think he's a very good martial artist. I think he's a good actor for what they would want this to be, and so I would have been on board.
Yeah, I think for the time, I mean, he was a hot stunt actor, a hot martial arts actor at the time. I mean, he played Snake Eyes, so I mean, that's kind of very similar, a white guy that learns how to use kung fu.
I'm Snake Eyes, Darth Maul, and he was Toad. I act. You know what? He was already in a Marvel movie.
There you go. But yeah, I like the character of Iron Fist, so I thought the Netflix show was fine, and I thought, um, whatever his name was, Finn Jones was fine, but I would like to see more from this character and probably a different version, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I would place this in more of like the middle realm of the pitches you've given so far.
Okay. So moving on to something where we don't have much specific story details, but just the talent involved. We have early attempts at a Shang-Chi movie. So this might intrigue you. In 2001, Stephen Norrington, who was fresh off of directing the first Blade movie, announced that he had agreed with Marvel Studios to direct a Shang-Chi film called, and this is a mouthful, The Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. Norrington described it as, and this is a real quote from an interview, he described it as a real, honest to goodness martial arts film rather than just a film that has martial arts in it. In 2004, it was announced that Ang Lee would be brought on to produce, and in 2005, it was announced that Stan Lee would executive produce a Shang-Chi film with DreamWorks, with Yuan Wu Ping, a Hong Kong martial arts director, making his Hollywood debut to direct the film, with a script that was said to be bloody and violent with the action and going for an R rating.
Okay.
So, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was more. Um, so I heard you say DreamWorks. I'm sure they do other stuff, but of course I know them for all the animation that they do. Would that have been an animated movie?
They produce quite a bit of live action films as well.
Okay. Um, yeah, I would once again I would probably I haven't even seen the one with, is it Sam Liu? Is that the name of the guy who was in the Marvel one?
Simu Liu, yeah.
There we go. Okay. The I haven't even seen that one. I don't know much about the character. I As you know, I like martial arts movies, so I'm sure I would have enjoyed it. But I would say this one also probably falls more in the middle of as far as excitement.
What do you think about the director of Blade directing a martial arts film like this versus maybe compare that to like a proper Hong Kong martial arts director who would
Well,
be making his Hollywood debut?
the second guy is going to do much better just because the I'm perfectly fine with it because I accept that it was late '90s, but the martial arts in the first Blade movie has been essentially torn to shreds by every every person with eyes, and so I can't help but feel like you know what I'm talking about. That scene at the end where they just do a bunch of spinny kicks at each other and no one gets hit and whatnot. Like I can't help but feel like Norrington would not have been the best person to direct a, if it was really trying to go in the martial arts way. I feel like the true martial arts director would have been better.
Completely agree. Okay, moving on to a Nick Fury solo film. So Andrew Marlowe, who wrote the scripts for Air Force One, End of Days, and Hollow Man, was hired to write a script for a live-action theatrical Nick Fury movie in 2006 before the MCU really took off. The script he wrote was based on Jim Steranko's Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. run that first introduced the government spy organization S.H.I.E.L.D. with Nick Fury as its top agent and leader. The story was pitched as a true blue 60s Cold War spy thriller with a story depicting Nick Fury as a plainclothes spy in the field, with many of Nick's fellow Howling Commandos established as fellow agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., including Contessa, which is Fury's primary love interest in his second in command. The story would also introduce several different rival spy groups, including Hydra and AIM, and would revolve primarily location wise on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. While the script was not written for the version of the character appearing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Marlowe did say that the script could be tweaked for Jackson's portrayal as a prequel to his character in canon with the universe, but no further developments on this idea took place. So
Okay.
Nick Fury, Cold War spy thriller.
It If I remember correctly, Nick Fury had his own like solo Marvel TV show on Disney Plus, and if I remember correctly, everybody said it was terrible. Now, I know part of that is to do with the state of Marvel at the time, but uh, I where I think my brain would go would be it would fall in line of if you remember my review for Joker, where I thought it was a very good movie, but I didn't feel like it. I felt like they just called it Joker to put more butts in seats, and that the movie could have been done with anybody else, and it still would have worked. And so I don't know. I enjoy spy thrillers, so I probably would like the movie, but I don't know if it draws me in because it's Nick Fury. Did that make sense?
Makes sense, but I feel like I might disagree a little bit with this just because it incorporates a lot of stuff like the Helicarrier, Shield, the Howling Commandos, Hydra, AIM. I think it could have a little bit of that comic bookiness.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the I had no idea who Nick Fury was until the MCU. So this
And this
is
is like I don't know if you know, but in the '90s, David Hasselhoff was Nick Fury for a TV movie. Have you seen
yeah.
that?
Yeah, I did know
Yeah.
that.
So this would have been maybe they could have recast him. I don't know.
No, I'm gonna say yes if this was David Hasselhoff. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go. So now we will discuss one of my favorite pitches, Guillermo del Toro's Doctor Strange.
Hmm.
So in 2007, Guillermo del Toro was attached to direct a Doctor Strange film that would have been based on a story treatment that he worked on with comic writer and novelist Neil Gaiman. Their story idea was to give Stephen Strange an origin story that would happen in the 1920s as an alcoholic and debarred physician. After hitting the bottom of the barrel, Strange would turn to the mystic arts and the Ancient One and work his way to becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. As Gaiman and Del Toro imagined, Strange would become a powerful sorcerer in the late 20s and, because of his magic, live in Greenwich Village for 90 years, ending in the present, looking the same, but no one really notices. The main villain of the story was Nightmare, the god of the nightmare realm, who would be depicted in this version as a Freddy Krueger-esque figure that rules the land our consciousnesses inhabit when we have nightmares. The story would feature the majority of New York City and then ultimately the world having common nightmares and being put into comatose states to feed Nightmare, who's trying to breach the dimensional barrier and control our reality, essentially plunge our entire reality into the nightmare realm. But get this, and this is the kicker, the film was eventually canceled due to low studio interest. What
Yeah.
do you think?
This is the one I was waiting for. I This is a hard yes. I would have wanted this a lot. Um, I feel like Del Toro and Doctor Strange is a match made in heaven, and so this is one I definitely would have wanted to see.
I think this is the one that I might preemptively say is the one I'd want to see the most. I mean, it's a killer combo, like Neil Gaiman writing, Guillermo del Toro directing, and the pitch. It just sounds so great, like using Nightmare. And actually, fun fact: Scott Derrickson actually wanted to use Nightmare in his original version of Doctor Strange in the MCU,
Mhm.
but like they basically wouldn't let him because they thought it was too dark of a character, like too dark of a villain.
I
So
really hope that the success of Deadpool and Wolverine will allow Marvel to not be afraid to go darker because I think this should prove that the audience is okay with it.
completely agree.
But I would also agree that preemptively this is probably the one I would also say I'd be most excited in.
Me too. Okay, moving on to Thomas Jane's The Punisher 2. Lionsgate Entertainment planned to produce a direct sequel to The Punisher, simply titled The Punisher 2. Director Jonathan Hensley was slated to return, along with titular star Thomas Jane, and Jane said in a 2005 interview that Jigsaw would be the villain for The Punisher 2. Hensley completed a first draft of the script before pulling out of the project around 2006, and John Dahl, who wrote the script for the horror movie Joyride, was in talks to direct the script who directed Joyride, was in talks to direct the script, but pulled out due to quote unquote script quality issues and the studio not wanting to give the budget necessary to adapt it. In an interview on May 15th, 2007, Thomas Jane revealed that he pulled out of the project due to creative differences and the budget of the film being cut. In addition, director Walter Hill, who you might know as the director of The Warriors, was turned down to direct at Lionsgate. Funnily enough, not well, just funny just because he directed, you've said it's one of the best movies, one of your favorite movies, but director of The Warriors was turned down and they considered Rob Zombie to direct the sequel. So, official story details not known, but we know it could have included Jigsaw as the main villain, could have potentially had Rob Zombie to direct. Not a lot to go on there, a little scattershot, but what are your thoughts?
um, I I don't remember much from the 2004 Thomas Jane Punisher. I know I watched it, and if I remember correctly, it is better than the Ray Stevenson one, but I don't remember absolutely loving it, but I also know I didn't hate it. So I'm gonna err on the side of like soft yes, where I'm sure I just would have wanted another superhero movie if I was if back in this time. But I don't know if I would say it like excites me a lot, if that makes sense.
But what about Rob Zombie directing?
That's just out of nowhere. Um, if okay, here's a better question. Would you have preferred uh uh Halloween 2007 Rob Zombie where he was under studio control, or Halloween 2009 Rob Zombie where they took the reins off and said do as you please for a Punisher film?
The studio has to interfere. I don't say that much, but he's one of those directors where he needs a leash.
There's I I feel like I feel like I could see Punisher 2 basically turning into the Devil's Rejects, and so that would be very interesting. That's a yeah, that one probably, just for the pure amount of craziness, I guess I probably would. Yeah, I'll raise my soft yes to a full yes.
Yeah, I'd be down. I've seen it once a couple years ago. I mean I liked it. I didn't think it was like insanely good or anything like a hidden gem, but I didn't think it was bad at all. It was definitely like 6.5 out of 10, which is pretty good for like a 2000s comic book movie.
I I will also say that if you remember from my from the pod where I talked about the Warriors, I discovered that Walter Hill is essentially the reason why we have the Alien franchise, because he was the one who originally funded Ridley Scott and was like, "I believe in you," and then he stayed on to do a lot of work with at least 2 and 3. I don't know when he would have left, but I just think that's so random that a guy who primarily did like buddy cop movies and The Warriors would go on to help make Alien.
Well, I mean, hey, Lionsgate did not think he was good enough to direct The Punisher too, so. Okay, our second to last one that we'll discuss is going to be an early attempt at a Luke Cage movie. So, once again, his name keeps coming up. In 1991, Quentin Tarantino wrote a script for a Luke Cage film that he eventually left as he decided to focus on developing the script for Pulp Fiction, but most notably, he wanted Lawrence Fishburne to star as Luke Cage. A different film adaptation of Luke Cage was in development in 2003 by Columbia Pictures, with a screenplay penned by Ben Ramsey, who had written The Big Hit and Love and a Bullet, with John Singleton, who directed Boys in the Hood, Shaft, and Too Fast, Too Furious, to direct. Jamie Foxx and Tyrese Gibson were being considered for the lead role, while Dwayne Johnson, Isaiah Mustafa, and Idris Elba were being considered for playing the character as well. This version was set in the 1980s during the introduction of crack to the black inner city, with the main antagonist being Harlem gangster Cottonmouth, introducing a deadly strain of the drug to the hood to build a criminal empire at the expense of the primarily black community. Cage would be Carl Lucas, an escaped convict for a murder he was framed for, living under the alias Luke Cage as a barber in Harlem, who develops an interest in his apartment neighbor, Detective Misty Knight, with tensions escalating when she discovers his true identity as he's still on the run. So, not much like specific plot details there, but that's just like overall big pitch. Ultimately, this just didn't move forward because they started to prioritize other projects, and there's some sketchiness on whether they wanted to prioritize a black led superhero film, and then eventually it just got worked into the series that we got. So, with that sort of pitch, John Singleton directing, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I feel like John Singleton is a legend for some of the stuff he's done, and I feel like he would have done this really well. So I'm gonna say yes. Luke Cage is another character I was relatively unfamiliar with before the TV show, and so I feel like this would have been a good introduction to the character from the bit that we know. So yeah, I mean, I would say, I would say, I would say yes. Yeah.
So out of those actors, who would you pick? We'll say Jamie Foxx, Tyrese Gibson, Dwayne Johnson, Isaiah Mustafa, Idris Elba.
It's man, give me 1 second because I gotta look up Isaiah Mustafa.
He's the Old Spice guy.
Oh yeah, I know him. Um, hmm, interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna say no to Jamie Foxx just right off the bat. Uh, I I feel like I would also like The Rock fits size wise, but I also don't know if I can see him as Luke Cage. That sounds weird, but I feel like he just looks the part. I don't know if I could see him playing the part. Based off of what I've seen the actors do, who was the second one after Jamie Foxx?
Tyrese Gibson.
That's right. Yeah. No, okay, so I would
He's
say
my
either
choice.
Mustafa or that's your choice.
Yes.
Interesting. So this is sad. This obviously I've seen him in other stuff than Fast and Furious, but I'm always going to go back to Fast and Furious, and I just can't picture that as Luke Cage. I feel like I would pick Mustafa or Elba, but probably Mustafa. Like I feel like from the stuff I've seen him in, he actually probably fits. Like I don't know. I feel like he'd be the one I would pick.
You didn't see Morbius with Tyrese Gibson in it?
I did, but I don't remember that movie.
That's fair.
um,
Anyway,
that's the what's the hold on, I can what's it called? The Four Brothers. Four Brothers is the most serious I probably can think of that I've seen him in. He definitely can do it. I don't know why. The not that Luke Cage doesn't have comedy, but I feel like he works really well when I don't know. Yeah, I guess he'd be my third pick. I can't see Jamie Foxx. He's the one I know for sure. And something feels off about Elba and Johnson. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm warming up to the idea, but I think I'd pick Mustafa.
fair. Okay. Moving into the final film we will discuss. We will be discussing Ang Lee's Hulk 2. So after the release of Ang Lee's Hulk, screenwriter James Schamus, who wrote the first one, began planning a sequel that he said wanted the Leader and Abomination as the main villains. Marvel specifically wanted the Abomination because they wanted an actual physical threat to the Hulk, unlike General Ross. During the filming of the first Hulk, producer Avi Arad had a target date of May 2005 in mind. However, that obviously didn't happen, and on January 18th, 2006, Arad confirmed Marvel Studios would still be producing a sequel since Universal did not meet the deadline for filming a sequel. Writer Zach Penn, who's known for writing Last Action Hero, Behind Enemy Lines, he worked on X2 and X-Men The Last Stand, began working on a sequel for Marvel Studios titled The Incredible Hulk. Edward Norton, so this is some interesting sort of tidbits of trivia. So the sequel for Hulk 2 was called The Incredible Hulk, and they actually recast Eric Bana as Edward Norton for that movie. Then what happened was, after signing on to star as part of his contract, and because he's basically a huge a-hole, Edward Norton basically made it part of the contract that he could rewrite the script. And he started rewriting Zach Penn's script. He started retelling the origin story in flashbacks and revelations, and helped establish the film as a reboot to sort of distinguish himself and not be linked to the previous film, even though it started out as a sequel to the previous film. And the director who was eventually brought on, Louis Leterrier, who directed Transporter, agreed with this approach. So that's why there's actually some people have noticed there's actually some vague continuity between Ang Lee's Hulk and the Incredible Hulk in the MCU. Namely, Ang Lee's Hulk ends with Bruce Banner taking refuge in the Brazilian jungle, and the Incredible Hulk begins with Bruce Banner inexplicably in Brazil, hiding out. But yeah, so it actually was written as a sequel to Ang Lee's Hulk. And like I said, how the sequel was set to feature the leader and Abomination. Obviously, we got Abomination, but also we have Tim Blake Nelson as Samuel Stearns, who in the comics becomes the leader, but while he doesn't become the villain in the movie, he is still in the movie. So yeah, the Incredible Hulk was actually originally the bare skeletons of that story was a sequel to Ang Lee's Hulk. So
Okay.
thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple things. So apparently, I haven't read them, but with the MCU movies, they release like tie-in comics, or at least they did. I don't know if they still do. And apparently, while the leader has never come back in live action form, the in the comics, he actually, or Tim Blake Nelson, he actually does become the leader. And apparently, anybody who's like interested in like, oh, that's a loose end they never tied up. Apparently, if you go to the comics, they do, and it's technically canon. It's weird how those comics work, but I randomly stumbled upon that random fun fact. And then another thing, the Incredible Hulk, as you know, for the longest time was one of my favorite MCU movies, and I learned that this is another just random fun fact. Apparently, it really sucks that. So Tim Roth apparently is a huge nerd. He loves Marvel, and he was really upset that he managed to take the casting of Abomination, because Abomination just didn't come back. I think he's in Shang-Chi, but I don't remember for sure.
He's in She-Hulk.
Okay. So that was I guess it's good they're finally bringing him back. Apparently, Tim Roth did like an interview where he was just like, "Man, I really wish that I could have gotten into character." Like as an example, apparently, Hugo Weaving despised playing Red Skull, and he was like, "I'm never coming back." And Tim Roth wishes that he could have been Red Skull, because apparently Marvel had plans to bring Red Skull back on a bunch of occasions, but they couldn't because Hugo didn't want to come back. And so it's like an interesting to think about in like the early days of the MCU, where there were actors like you mentioned, Edward Norton, that were like they didn't like being in a superhero movie, and then there were ones that did, who just were unfortunately not able to come back, and like how that all happened to work out is just interesting. What could have been had, let's just say, Tim Roth be cast as a different character and all that jazz. But anyway, yeah, that's interesting. I so if I remember correctly, the Universal Hulk rights are really weird, and that's why Hulk kept appearing in Marvel movies, but he couldn't have his own solo movie, right? Isn't that how that worked with the MCU?
Yeah, so it was different from the Sony Spider-Man deal, where basically it wasn't, because like with Spider-Man, it's like Marvel Studios is basically renting them from Spider-Man from Sony. This was like they jointly owned the rights, but they had different aspects of the rights, and so Marvel could use the Hulk and associated characters in different like whatever shows, movies, etc. But Universal had to give explicit permission to do like a solo film or a film with like Hulk in the title. And that's why how like Thor Ragnarok basically became a Planet Hulk movie. That was their get around because they couldn't make a Planet Hulk movie because then Universal would have to say yes or no. And after being burned on Ang Lee's Hulk, which didn't do too well and wasn't received well, then the Incredible Hulk, which didn't do well and didn't get received well, they basically got super sketched out and were like, we basically don't want to make any more Hulk movies. So they kept just denying Marvel's attempts to make a solo Hulk film. So that was sort of the arrangement.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because when I was a kid, I thought the movies were the same and that they had just recasted Banner, and then I didn't learn until later that they were completely separate. So it's funny to know now that like my little 4 or 5 year old brain or whatever was actually right that they are connected.
It's literally just because of Edward Norton's ego that it's a reboot and not a sequel.
That's interesting. It's a shame. I did not know that. He's a really good actor. It sucks that he's not fun to work with.
Yeah, he's that's why he wasn't invited back for Avengers. Like literally,
Interesting.
he basically got soft fired. He didn't leave. They were just like, no, because once again, one of like it's apparently a frequent thing. Like part of his contracts are like, I will agree to star in your film, but I can like rewrite the script however I want, whenever I want.
That's such a weird clause to have.
So when he came on to The Incredible Hulk and just kept rewriting it to make it basically a distinct reboot rather than a sequel, when he was being considered to come in with Avengers, he was basically like, okay, I'll be Hulk in the Avengers, but I get to rewrite parts of the script if I want. And then Kevin Feige was like, no. And he's even said, Kevin Feige has said, and he's has no conniption about saying this by name. He said, Edward Norton is the one actor I will never work with again, like
All
by
right.
name.
What was that? It was a similar thing. What happened with Terrence Howard being recast as Don Cheadle, or was it Howard who didn't want to come back?
No, he wanted way more money.
Oh,
He
okay.
basically, he was basically like, uh, for the Iron Man 2, he was like, basically, I don't know if he got paid more than RDJ for Iron Man 1 because if you everyone knows his career was like down in the tubes when he took that role, so he wasn't as hot of a commodity as he is now. I don't know if
Mhm.
he got paid basically, let's just say for the sake of the point, let's say they got paid the same and then he got launched into stardom. Robert Downey Jr. would have made significantly more, like his pay got boosted more than Terrence Howard's pay got boosted, and he wanted to like basically be equal with like I want to get paid as much as RDJ gets paid. And then they're like, that's cute.
Interesting. I guess it ended up working out because Terrence Howard would go on to be was Empire the name of that popular show?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess it ended up working out, but that would actually be hilarious if it didn't work out and Howard could have been a part of a major franchise that we just saw happen and he was all over. Okay, that's interesting. Um,
Yeah.
would you have wanted to see Ang Lee's Hulk separate from? Well, actually, I guess if I remember correctly, Incredible Hulk came out a few months after Iron Man, right? Aren't they the same year?
Yeah. Iron Man came out in May of 2008. Incredible Hulk came out like July or August of 2008.
Wasn't that Incredible Hulk not originally a part of the like idea or vision of the MCU that Iron Man was starting, and then after the fact they added it in?
Yeah. So it was basically its own thing that could have gone either way. But after the success of Iron Man, they filmed the post-credit scene really quickly where Tony Stark appears at the end and talks to General Ross. Like that was filmed in the months prior, just after Iron Man. They brought him in just to like film that one scene.
Okay. So yeah. So then I guess what the question would be since that sequel got developed into Incredible Hulk, would you have preferred Ang Lee's Hulk just got a proper sequel like with Eric Bana and continuing on, or do you prefer what we ended up getting, or I guess maybe a better way to phrase that is a a sequel that evolved without Edward Norton touching everything?
No, I'm glad we got what we got. I think Ang Lee's Hulk movie with most of the 2000s Marvel movies we've talked about is fine. I don't think it's like a super great hidden gem, but I don't think it's terrible either. I think it's fine. But I really do like Incredible Hulk. It's one of the most underrated MCU films, and I like that interpretation of the Hulk the best in that movie. And so I think that I much rather would have gotten what we got.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said earlier, as you know, The Incredible Hulk is one of my favorite MCU movies, and the um of the 2000s movies, I know I said earlier that I'm a pretty big defender of a lot of them. Ang Lee's Hulk is the one I don't really defend. I haven't seen it in ages, but that was one I did not like as a kid. I prefer the
Yeah.
Edward Norton one.
And last thing I'll say, fun fact, Zack Snyder has said that the one like if he could do any Marvel character, he would want to do a Hulk movie. So just putting that out there.
Gotta have Zack Snyder Hulk. Um, there is one more thing that I wanted to talk about. This never got to any sort of scripting phase or anything like that. However, it's one of my like favorite universes that almost happened. So, with the success of Blade, and then the early 2000s success of both Underworld and Resident Evil, for some reason, some studio heads just decided, hey, Freddy versus Jason, Alien versus Predator, like, let's combine universes. And so there were a lot of talks behind the scenes of specifically Blade and Underworld crossing over, because of course they both are about vampires. But ironically, from the reports I've read, they more wanted to cross them over because of the whole like black suit thing, which I just think is a hilarious. Like it sounds like it wasn't even because of vampires; it's because they both were popular black suit characters, which is also where Resident Evil came from, because she also becomes like a popular like I'm wearing all leather. So it's it. I don't see the Resident Evil one at all, though it was talked about. Because it's just weird to do vampires and zombies. I have no idea where that would have gone. But I bring this up because I actually think it would have been really interesting had Blade and Underworld crossed over. A, because then of course it makes the Underworld lore a part of the Marvel universe, which could have been interesting for the future. But B, the uh uh the the lore of both I sorry, I guess Underworld's not a trilogy. Both franchises' lore, I feel like actually meshes together pretty well, or at least could mesh. And it would have been interesting to see Kate Beckinsale and Wesley Snipes on screen together. I don't know. That's like one of the ones that I kind of wish went past the talking stage. But by the time it happened, Blade Trilogy was a thing and it wasn't received as well, and Wesley Snipes was going a little crazy, and like it sounds like they talked about it and then as quickly as it started, they like finished their drinks and then we're done. At the like the lunch ended. But it was noted that they did try, so I wanted to mention that.
We got the Black Leather Vampire Cinematic Universe.
That's they literally I loved that it wasn't that they were both about vampires. The report literally says that the studio heads wanted to combine all of the Black Leather action franchises, which I just think is hilarious.
There you go. So there you go. Which one out of all of these would you say you wanted to see the most?
Definitely Guillermo del Toro, Doctor Strange. Excluding my
I
own, of
completely,
course, because like I said, the Blade Underworld would have been a thing I would have wanted to see. But of the actual like real pitches, Guillermo del Toro, Doctor Strange.
I completely agree. What about just one follow up, like a runner
One
up?
The runner up I would probably say would have to be that Blade Underworld crossover.
I don't know what my runner-up would be.
I,
I've been
I
thinking.
I would say, and I don't know if you would agree with this, I would say that I feel like this episode had the weakest pitches of the ones we've done so far. Like there were a lot of ones that I either just didn't care about or I didn't care about as much, or I would say I wasn't as excited about as some of the other ones you've pitched in previous episodes.
There's a lot less information on each of these, was what I found. Actually, okay, Doctor Doom solo movie. That's my follow-up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. That one definitely. Yeah, I would put that one I would put that one either third or fourth behind the continuance of the Tim Story Fantastic Four universe.
For me as well. So
Okay.
there you have it.
Yeah.
Unmade Marvel movies.